Dave Chang is an avid student and fan of sports, music, art, film, and of course, food. With a rotating cast of guests, they have conversations that cover everything from the creative process to his guests' guiltiest pleasures. Follow The Dave Chang Show on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. When a train hits a vehicle at a railway crossing, the results are often deadly. Be cautious at crossings, and if the signals are flashing, don't be tempted to try and sneak across the tracks, even if you don't see a train. Stop. Trains can't.
This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Introducing DirecTV Stream, the best of live TV and on demand, which means you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. So whether you want to catch the game live or watch the latest blockbuster, they've got you covered. And there's no annual contract. DirecTV Stream. Get your TV together at directtv.com. Requires high-speed internet and compatible device. Content varies by package and location. Restrictions apply.
I'm Sean Fennessy.
I'm Amanda Dobbins.
And this is The Big Picture, a conversation about transformations. Later in this show, we'll talk about The Eyes of Tammy Faye, a Jessica Chastain showcase, and a possible Oscar contender. Speaking of which, Amanda, it's late September, and that can only mean one thing. We have begun that deathless march to the center of the hellscape, better known as awards season. The Telluride and Toronto International Film Festivals are in the books. The New York Film Festival kicks off this week. Amidst it all, it seems like a new normal is taking shape. Prestige films are premiering. Movie stars are very much running for these awards, and the big races are on. Will anyone care about any of this stuff? I don't totally know anymore, but let's talk about it. Let's start with Toronto. So from afar, neither you nor I was at the Toronto International Film Festival. What'd you make of the whole show? What are your takeaways from some of the awards? How are we feeling about the beginning of this new season?
Well, because I was paying a lot less attention, it seems like everyone else was paying less attention, which is perhaps biased. Perhaps that's just one woman's perspective and not reality. But I definitely just kind of got an afternoon alert being like, oh, Belfast won the Toronto People's Choice Award. Okay. So that's the thing that I got to put on my to-do list, or kind of like move up my to-do list. It was obviously already on it. And everything else just seemed like campaigning, which is great. It's nice to have movie stars back. I'm very pro the movie star aspect of the film festivals, the red carpet, the Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez of it all. Like, give me as much as you want. So that's nice. But, they're just the lag between the awards season and what people who pay a lot of attention to this stuff are doing, and then when everybody else can see the movies and how those movies enter the consciousness, just seems to get bigger every year.
It does. Let's start with Belfast. Belfast was a movie I talked about after I returned from Telluride, a movie that I liked. That is a very nice film from Kenneth Branagh, one of your heroes.
Chill out.
It's a personal film, a memoir of sorts about his time growing up as a young boy in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. It does very much resemble a lot of other recent kind of memory films like that, particularly Roma. It's a crowd pleaser, even though it's about a very difficult time in world history. And so it's not shocking to see a movie like this win that People's Choice Awards. Usually it's a movie that makes people feel good or excited or feels like it has a kind of profundity that is not difficult to locate, that is kind of on the surface. That's usually the kind of movie. And those movies often go on to be nominated for Best Picture. 12 of the past 13 films that won the Audience Award were nominated for Best Picture. I think 5 of the last 12 winners went on to win Best Picture. So there's something to the relevance of this movie. You are right, though, that we are still 7 weeks or so out from the world being able to see Belfast. Belfast is the kind of movie that I think would have very easily been an art house hit and maybe could have transcended that. It's a film that I think old people are really going to enjoy. It's got a beautiful portrait of old people. It's got a beautiful portrait of a different time.
I think we got to work on our terminology. The closer we get to this bracket, the more respectful we need to be.
I feel comfortable aligning with my generation. Okay. I am on the brink of 40. I'm thinking maybe I'm old people. There's a reason this movie worked on me in a way that I would have totally rejected it 15 years ago. Okay. So there's something I think I'm growing more sympathetic and not judgmental towards the geriatric.
Okay, I just do think when we talk about this is rude. Old people are wonderful. Listen to them, learn from them. They also are the only people until COVID who still went to movies and who care about movies. So we have to respect them. But when we're having these conversations, I think we're sometimes talking about this senior discount people who really were actively going to the theater and not really as invested in the streaming experience as you and I were. So, and that is a separate audience from us, even though put me on a glacier, basically. I am old, but we're talking about a different generation.
Yeah, we are. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because obviously older folks are more susceptible to the virus. So there's a little bit more, it can be a little scarier, the idea of going to a movie theater. And so that might challenge the audiences to movies like this. This is a Focus Features movie. It's a Universal movie. So it is going to go into theaters first. It's not a streaming proposition. Whether that will help or hurt it in this award season, I really have no feel for that. But we shall see. Kenneth Branagh appears to be very much going for it. He's going to run. He's going to do the circuit. Mm-hmm. He's very excited to talk about this movie, justifiably. Whether or not it is, I don't want to say worthy. I don't even know what the right word is. I don't even know what a good Oscar winner would be anymore. That's part of where I'm stuck.
You want to share your partially snide tweet? It's okay if I ask you to share what you tweeted about it instead of you being like, let me share what I tweeted.
I mean, nobody is better at rewarding something 10 years too late than the Oscars. And so the idea of not giving Best Picture to Roma a few years ago and instead rewarding Green Book and then identifying another black and white memory film told from the perspective of a child about a tumultuous period in their life, that would be perfectly Oscars, for the Oscars to just be late to the party when it comes to that sort of thing. There's also the whole complication of, one film is in a foreign language and this film is in English. And, so you can see. Now, I will say the truest crowd pleaser that I've seen this award season is King Richard, which, we're obviously very excited to do an episode about, also coming in November. If that movie had played TIFF, that movie probably would have won the audience award. And then if it had, I think there would have been a big conversation around this movie. It would have put a lot of heat and energy around it. Without that, I'm kind of curious to see whether it'll just be the Will Smith show and whether he'll be racing towards a Best Actor Oscar. I don't know. We're going to find out.
Number one, please don't dismiss the Will Smith show. We should be so lucky to have 6 months of the Will Smith show. I've been thinking so much about how Jennifer Lopez was not nominated for Hustlers. And so just stupid. What a colossal mistake of survival that was for the Oscars. You idiots, don't do that again just because someone is actually popular and successful and makes money. You need Will Smith this season. I know I'm setting myself up for so much heartbreak. Right now, it's starting. But we can't do this again. We need to have people that other people have heard of at the Oscars. It's just my tip.
I totally agree. I mean, do you want to just have that conversation right now? Maybe put it in the context of the Emmys. I didn't watch the Emmys. You did.
I watched most of them. There was some DVR and, prime, number one television confusion in our households about who was getting the big living room TV. And,
okay.
and then house, not Amanda. And then spoilers were sort of given, not understanding that I would go to the secondary TV, to watch. Anyway, so I didn't get to see Kate Winslet's speech, who won for Mayor of Easttown in the Best Actress limited series and 18 other things. I also missed the Scott Frank moment, which I heard was for the best. But I did get to watch the show as a show. And the Emmys were on CBS this year. They were hosted by Cedric the Entertainer. And they were definitely trying to get back to, quote, normal, quote, awards show, quote, pre-COVID, quote, I don't know, traditional. And I have to say it was not for me. They did all of the things that after the Oscars, people wished would happen at an awards show. There was a host. There were some jokes. I actually quite enjoyed some of the monologue or just the general host banter. That was fine. The pre-tape segments, not so much. But there were pre-tape segments. And then there were also clips. And then there were also people who are on CBS shows that I've never heard of talking about the importance of television after the clips before hanging out the awards. So they really laid everything on. And it just felt inert and completely like out of conversation with the moment. It was pretty weird to see a bunch of people in a tent, COVID still being what it is. Seth Rogen made some jokes about that, but also pretending like it never happened. But also it's really, I don't watch CBS. Most people I know don't watch CBS. I understand that it's a popular network, but going back to the generational segmentation that we were talking about earlier, it's not aimed at my generation. So I had no idea who half the people were. And then the awards themselves went to shows I mostly like, but basically 3 shows that get talked a lot about on Twitter. So there was this total disconnect between the people who are being honored, the ideas of what television are, and also the idea of what's entertaining on a screen. And I was like, man, I don't know how you do an awards show anymore.
Yeah, I think there is some dismay about that. The fact that the show that they put on, as you describe it, is so radically in the opposite direction of the Oscar ceremony from March. And it really didn't matter. Like they tried to do something significantly more traditional. It sounds frankly like a Bob Hope Oscars, what you just described, or at worst a Billy Crystal Oscars. And Chris Ryan and I were texting about it this morning with Bill Simmons, and we were just saying, like, if more than 6 million people watch this, I'll be shocked. 7 years ago, 18 million people watched the Emmys. So this stuff is in a tailspin.
The early numbers are in, and it is, I believe it was 7.4 million, which
that's not bad, actually. That's better than I would have thought.
Well, sure, but as you just said, 7 million as opposed to 18 million, 20 million. The Oscars, when you and I were growing up on them, were like 30 and 40 million, I think. I don't know. I'm just yelling millions of numbers, but a lot more people. And 7.4 million is being touted as an improvement. And that's tough. I mean, they're in a hard position. These things are very hard to do in COVID. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and it's very hard to solve for like such a diverse streaming experience that so many people are watching so many different things, and we're so completely siloed now. Like, what are you supposed to do? But I didn't enjoy it. I have a proposal though.
Okay. Shoot, I'm excited.
That's primarily for the Emmys. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I feel now more than ever that the Emmys really need to move to the beginning of the year, and we need to have a dedicated award season. The Grammys are already at the beginning of the year. The Oscars are already at the beginning of the year. Put the Golden Globes. I don't know what's happening with all of it, but presumably at some point they'll try to come back if they can get their act together, they being the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. But so you start kind of a period of reflection, right? And it's after the end of the calendar year. That's one thing about the Emmys that's very confusing. It's like, what is eligible? Hamilton won an award. The video version of Hamilton won an Emmy.
I saw this over Bo Burnham Inside, which is frankly a crime.
Well, we'll just claim Inside for movies, but also that came out definitely more than a calendar year ago.
And was filmed 3.5 years ago.
And also, frankly, has been up for every single award for the last 18 months. And finally, they won one.
That's a joke. That in
it
particular is a joke.
Right. And you'd have to sort out some of the eligibility requirements. I still think that shows or movies or whatever should only be allowed to submit for an Emmy or an Oscar. None of this, just like playing the field, seeing what you can get. But if you moved the Emmys and you were like, okay, so now it's award season, you would at least train people to be like, okay, so this is the time when we think about what was good and what was bad in the last calendar year, which like people already do. December is year-end list month. Yep. It's coming soon, guys. Just, get ready. We're making ours.
Get ready on this pod. We're doing a year-end pod probably the first week of December.
I know. I saw that on the spreadsheet and I was like, oh my God, I have to start getting ready now. But anyway, it's true. But so people are already in that frame of mind, and you can kind of corral people's attention a bit more. And I think it does, if we want to keep giving out awards, which I do, number one, because it like does get people talking about things in a way that is like increasingly difficult. And two, also because I like it when people wear fancy dresses and give random speeches on the screen. I still like it. I don't know. I'm not the only one.
I think you're onto something for sure. If we treated award season the same way we treat, say, I don't know, the NBA playoffs, where in the NBA playoffs, we know we're basically going to have 2.5, maybe even 3 full months of engagement with just the playoff format. It could be the same with award season. It could be the first week of January is the Grammys, the first week of February is the first week of February is the Emmys, and the first week of March is the Oscars. And then we have it essentially contained to a 2-month period. And obviously, like, the industry itself would not like that. You know, they like the idea of spacing these things out to kind of maximize attention. So if you buttress the Emmys with the Oscars, you've got the whole PR industrial awards complex converging on itself, and they wouldn't enjoy that. But from a user perspective, from a viewer perspective, it probably would make more sense to compartmentalize it.
Well, and movies are already doing this, right? We have awards movies from September for critics and people who go to festivals, and like late October to December for the rest of us.
That's right.
And then, you know, your summer blockbuster period is April or May or whenever Marvel decides to release its first, you know, big tent pole through July. August has like mostly gone back to like a dump month with like 1 or 2 things that people like to argue about. What's up to Sean's free guy friends. And so there is a pattern. And I think organization long-term would be good for the industry as well. I know that they're just like, let me throw everything out. Let me just catch an audience every 2 seconds. But there's too much, and people are missing things, and people can't find things, and people don't know when things are available. And there is like a nice inherent rhythm to these things. So, or like if there is a rhythm, people do latch onto it. People actually start to find things, or they did before. So it might help.
You know, you raise something interesting here. Last night in his newsletter, Matt Bellany, former editorial director of The Hollywood Reporter, who now is part of this new startup called Puck, wrote a piece about a meeting that the powers that be in ABC and Disney recently had with the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to address effectively what we're talking through here, which is the long-term viability of the Academy Awards as a TV show, which was once one of the 2 or 3 most seen TV shows in America and is now at risk of slipping into 20th place, 30th place, 40th place. You know, there are episodes of like NCIS that are outpacing last night's Emmys telecast. The Oscars knows they need to fix something. They took a chance last year on a COVID production that was completely different from what they'd previously done. I think it was roundly considered a failure. I know there were aspects of it that you enjoyed. There were a couple things about it that I enjoyed, but it didn't work. And they're really at cross purposes about what to do to make this thing matter to people. Now, what it made me think of when I was reading Matt's piece was, if we do what you're suggesting, and let's say we bring, and by we, I mean the powers that be. I have no power here. I'm just a podcaster.
No power, yeah.
But if we did that, if we moved the Emmys into that corridor, what that would ultimately lead to is just consolidation, which is we need one award show. We need a pop culture Super Bowl, and we need to find a way to marshal all of the forces of entertainment together if you want to make that matter. Now, that might ultimately still be a fool's errand, because our attention has been so atomized and it's so diffuse and so diverse, as you pointed out, that, you know, Ted Lasso feels like it's dominating popular culture right now. If more than 10 to 15 million people are watching Ted Lasso, I'd be shocked. In the 1980s, 10 to 15 million people watching your show was like a solid performance. And Ted Lasso feels like the biggest damn thing in the world if you look at Twitter. So I don't know if we're ever going to get back to a point where that matters.
If you look at Twitter, is a very important asterisk, and as always, like a disproportionate view of the world.
It is, so. But I think a show like that effectively sweeping the Emmys elevates it, you know, beyond that, you know, discourse that is so easy for us to sneer at, even when I'm participating in it, though you are often not. And I think it's challenging because obviously we've been talking about the primacy of movies a lot over the last 3 years on the show. We've been looking at the ways that, you know, sometimes Quentin Tarantino said it on the show a couple of months ago. It's like basically the best movie he saw last year was The Queen's Gambit, right? We love The Queen's Gambit. We did an episode on The Queen's Gambit because we were like, sure, it's 6 hours, but it's basically got all the form and function of a movie. All this stuff is converging onto each other. Do you think ultimately, if say in 2026, there is no Emmys and Oscars. It is one big get together. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Obviously, the Golden Globes has now been kind of pushed out of the frame here, so there's an opening for something like this. Is it even possible? Could the two units get together and form something? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, if the Emmys and the Oscars got together, that's a different conversation. And maybe you have the Emmys and then you have the Oscars and then you have some sort of like Super Bowl of whatever. That seems pretty hokey in my opinion. And I'm thinking about all of the kind of also ran awards shows that have tried to do this, right? From the MTV Movie Awards, which, whatever you think of them, teenagers watch, to People's Choice Awards, to the Billboard Awards, whatever those are, there's always something. The Critics' Choice Awards is a recent example of an awards show that, tried to insert itself into the Oscar conversation. I think so far with limited results, because really it doesn't have the budget. It doesn't have the production level and ability to muscle its way in, though maybe without the Golden Globes, we'll see. So I do think that some of the power of these things is still that they're grandfathered in, that there is a historical element to them. And there is also brand name recognition to an Oscar and to a lesser extent an Emmy. And do you think Emmys or Golden Globes are more famous?
Typically, the Golden Globes, I believe, in the last 10 years has outrated the Emmys. I could be wrong about that. I think that's the case.
Right. But like the average person on the street, would they be more impressed by like, oh, she won 4 Emmys or, oh, she won 4 Golden Globes?
See, that is different.
That is different.
That is a credibility question. Sure. I guess awareness versus credibility. I think even casual observers realize that Golden Globes don't mean a lot, that they don't ultimately reflect necessarily the highest quality of quality. But let's be real. Like, does the Emmys have the greatest track record of acknowledging the perfection in television work? Sometimes I have no idea what they're. I feel like Modern Family won like 300,000 Emmys, and Modern Family was a good show. But was it transcendent? It was a good show.
No, it's true. It feels like people only even started taking. I don't know that people take the Emmys seriously, but we only started taking TV seriously, 15 years ago? So
true.
Which is rude to TV, and we were all wrong. But
I think it's so funny that you say that, because I was thinking about that very specifically, which is in part because I've been doing the Sopranos rewatch and thinking a little bit about how everything changed about 20 years ago on television. But TV essentially became much more canonical, I think, in this century. It became much more important to identify what is the greatest of all time. That doesn't take away from the fact that MASH and All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore and the Jeffersons, and there were a lot of shows over that time that were considered great and culture changing. I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners. There was history in TV, but there was not this sense that it had become a profound American art form. It was a profound American form of entertainment. And that did change, I think, in part with HBO and The Sopranos kind of taking the wheel on the format. Now, if the Emmys is supposed to be the place that shows us how the art form has evolved, I think actually in the nominations this year, they did some interesting work by saying like, hey, here's I May Destroy You, here's The Crown, here's Mayor of Easttown, here's The Queen's Gambit, here's WandaVision. Here's some mainstream stuff that actually is doing really well by its source material. Here is some original storytelling. Here's some kind of grand adaptations of literary works. They did a pretty good job of spreading the wealth, but then once you get down to the wins, as it so often does with these award shows, when you get sweeps in big categories or across these kind of subcategories, it doesn't seem very representative. It doesn't really seem like it's reflecting the art form.
And there were sweeps in the main categories too, which is something that used to happen at the Oscars all the time, right? The movie that was nominated for 10 Oscars won 8 Oscars.
Yes.
And in the last 5 to 10 years, the movie that's nominated for 10 or 11 Oscars wins none.
It's true. I think the 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 9 or 2 out of 7 thing is happening more frequently in the Academy Awards because the voting body is more diverse. The pool of films that they're trying to recognize is more diverse. And I don't just mean kind of culturally or racially diverse. I mean diverse in terms of where they originate from or, what kind of filmmakers are making them. It kind of cuts across the board. But I don't think that we're obviously never getting back to where we were, right? The idea of even doing this show years ago was born out of some nostalgic sense of centrality in the culture. And in fact, I think most of the time when we've had our conversations on this show, very rarely have we said, oh my goodness, the Oscars, they simply nailed it. They absolutely got it right. What a glory it is.
Sean, we had one magical moment at Parasite 1.
That was amazing. And
your voice cracked. And then we all went home and didn't leave our houses for 2 years.
Yeah, gosh, that really was the turning point in our lives, in American culture, and so many things that have happened to us over the last 2 years. That was a great moment. And it was representative of what the Oscars could be, obviously. And still could be again in terms of recognizing, but that was a all-time record low audience for that show, and it's only dipped since. So that's the thing, is things will just become smaller. We'll still find a way to appreciate them. I think when I look at the landscape of movies, say, that premiered at TIFF, some of the films I saw at Telluride, what is still to come in the year in movies, there's a lot of stuff that I'm really anticipating or that I'm really happy to have seen. I loved The Power of the Dog. I think it's really exciting that The Power of the Dog is going to be in the awards race this year. Jane Campion's going to be there. Benedict Cumberbatch, who got rave reviews for the film out of TIFF. A lot more people saw the film now. He seems almost certain to be competing with Will Smith for Best Actor. Kirsten Dunst, likewise, I think is going to really compete for Best Supporting Actress. That's cool to see. We'll talk about Dune. Dune premiered. I think I think my Dune point of view was ratified. It seemed like a lot of people had a similar response to I did, which is this movie there's a lot of wow in this movie, and there's a lot of like, wow, it's over in this movie. And that's probably going to continue. Last Night in Soho premiered, mixed reaction, Edgar Wright's movie. The movie that probably got the small movie that probably got the biggest buzz, I think, was probably Stephen Karam's The Humans, which is an adaptation of his play, starring Richard Jenkins and Beanie Feldstein and a handful of others. That's an A24 movie, but again, that movie feels almost a little too small for the Oscars. Maybe it'll be an acting recognition. Dear Evan Hansen premiered. I still haven't seen Dear Evan Hansen. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have seen Dear Evan Hansen.
Well, we will talk about Dear Evan Hansen on this podcast on Friday, because a lot of people, I would say that film did not get good reviews.
I'm going to save it for the Friday pod. And you guys don't have to watch Dear Evan Hansen to listen to what I have to say on Friday.
We will do a non-spoiler conversation about Dear Evan Hansen.
No, it'll be a spoiler, but it's nothing that's not in the trailer.
So TIFF is in the books. There's a handful of movies, like you can already see. I talked about The Rescue, Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin's documentary about the Thai cave divers who saved the 13 young soccer players. That's a movie that clearly is going to compete for Best Documentary, and some people already think is a lock to win Best Documentary, even though the Chai and Jimmy won for Free Solo just 2 years ago. We'll see. It was interesting to see a film like that kind of take the lead early on in the race. Aside from that, though, all I'm really counting on at the moment is Will Smith and Benedict Cumberbatch. Those are the only two things that have yet happened where I'm like, okay, this is... Oh, and I guess Kristen Stewart and Spencer. That is the other thing that it feels like everybody has accepted, that no matter what you think of that film, she is marvelous in it, which she is. So New York Film Festival starts this week. Neither of us are going. Bummer. I've actually been to the last few New York Film Festivals. It's really an amazing festival. That would be an amazing place for you and I to go together and do shows and talk to people. That would maybe in the future.
You've been rewatching Sopranos and I've been rewatching Sex and the City, which is not an accurate portrayal of New York as 1,000 think pieces can tell you, but still really just made me miss it. It made me miss the random tour bus Magnolia version of it, even, which I was not a part of.
New York in late September is a marvelous place. It is truly one of the great experiences in the world. We're not going to be there. A couple of big movies premiering. The first and foremost, Tragedy of Macbeth. This is Joel Coen's debut solo directorial feature.
What was the podcast where we just started listing Shakespeare plays that we liked?
I don't know. That's been a lot of podcasts, honestly.
That was like a deep summer. Things were getting really weird. It must have been a movie auction. And just everyone was just free associating Shakespeare plays.
What's the move here with Tragedy of Macbeth? Is it to do top Shakespearean adaptations as a pod? Is that what we should do?
That's a fun one because, it's been, obviously, did you know that Shakespeare's been adapted many times?
It's a lot to choose from.
But also, we would just sound like idiots on it throughout because it's such a broad topic. But yeah, I have so many favorites.
It's a rich
I love
text.
Shakespeare, Sean, but there's no way to talk about it without
incredible take.
Stupid.
It's just this really strong take by you.
Thank you.
You're bringing it on a Monday morning.
Winston Churchill and Shakespeare.
It's
and
diverse.
Italy.
Yes. Music, Winston Churchill, Shakespeare, Italy.
Mhm.
What about food? Are you in on food?
Very pro.
Okay. Okay. So Tragedy Macbeth is premiering soon. Parallel Mothers, which is the Pedro Almodovar film, which we'll talk about hopefully on this show. I'm really excited for Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta, which premiered at Cannes, which is, of course, the kinky nun movie.
I was going to say, that's the sexy nuns, right?
Yes. Sign me up. And then The Souvenir Part 2, which, Amanda, I saw this movie. Did I tell you that?
Listen, what's up with this? My husband keeps getting invitations to see The Souvenir Part 2. You guys have my email. Like, I don't need this strife in my home. It's getting like pretty heated because for whatever reason, he's just like, I'm going to go. Do you mind? And I'm like, why can't we go together? Like, why? Like, we don't go on dates anymore. Can't you just wait? Souvenir Part 2?
Sounds like scenes from a marriage, honestly.
Yeah.
Have you I think you should do a solo pod about The Souvenir Part 2, like Colin Coward style, where you just talk for 45 minutes uninterrupted.
I have to see it. I want to see it. I loved The Souvenir Part 1 so much.
It's a rich text. Part 2 is an interesting film, and it's part of a series of thematically linked films that hopefully we'll talk about after you get a chance to see it. So one of the other things that happened at the Toronto Film Festival was that Jessica Chastain was celebrated. She was touted for her work in The Eyes of Tammy Faye. She was given one of the Tribute Actor Awards.
I had a question about these. Were people in competition for these awards, or was it sort of like the Telluride predetermined, you'll come to the festival and we'll celebrate you?
I believe it was the latter.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's good to know what's coming sometimes, but I was just curious.
Yeah, she was granted this award by the film festival, not by the audience members.
Okay.
The Eyes of Tammy Faye debuted at TIFF, and well, it's an interesting text. Let's talk about it. I'm going to give a little bit of a summary of what this movie is about for those of you who are not aware, because frankly, it opened in a small number of theaters and it didn't do great business over the weekend, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. We've seen this story before in award season, and just because a film opens small doesn't necessarily mean it's going away. This is a docudrama about the rise and fall of the infamous televangelist Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker. They built and used their PTL, Praise the Lord television network, to construct a really influential ministry, amass a fortune, and that fortune eventually became their downfall because they were skimming from the top, as they say. Michael Showalter is the director of this film. You may know him as the director of The Big Sick or as a member of the comedy troupe The State. Stars Andrew Garfield and Chastain as Jim and Tammy Faye. In some ways, I think it's a pretty standard biopic / docudrama about real life events. In other ways, it attempts to do something that I think a couple of other films that are coming out this year are trying to do, which is to create this like almost like psychedelic, hypnotic, over dramatized portrait of these vainglorious people, and features kind of like a descent into madness of a kind for the two figures at the center of the movie. It's based on a documentary from 2000 that was much more clearly focused on Tammy Faye and not as much necessarily on Jim Bakker. And, you know, while Garfield is her co-star, it's very much the Jessica Chastain show. What do you think of The Eyes of Tammy Faye?
Well, I wanted to ask you, how much did you know about Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker before this?
I think I knew a solid amount. I would say I knew the bones of the story, but I'll admit to getting my televangelist confused over the years. So I wasn't totally sure where we were going here. I think I actually knew more about, say, like the Jessica Hahn aspect of the Jim Bakker story because I was a Howard Stern listener and she became like a Howard Stern guest, and that was where a lot of those revelations came from. And the film is really not focused on that very much. Obviously, it talks about those events, but I must not have seen the documentary from 2000, and so I didn't really know. My Tammy Faye Bakker experiences was watching her on like VH1 reality shows, not on understanding her as a figure of 80s and 90s popular culture, essentially.
Yeah, I knew her as a reference and really as that kind of late in life visual of the makeup, which we'll come back to. But the confusing the televangelists completely, it was sort of like televangelist bingo watching this movie. At some point, they brought up the 700 Club, and I was like, oh, I know what that is, but that's you guys, but it's not. And they were all somewhat interchangeable to me, even though apparently the PTL headquarters, and this all happened outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, where my mother's family is from, and I was spending time there, but Shout out to anyone listening in Concord, North Carolina. I wonder if there is anybody. But I really had very little specific understanding of these people or what their story was about. And so I found it hard to understand what was being presented to me as a biopic and what was being presented to me as commentary. And ultimately, what the movie was trying to say about these people, because I didn't have the base understanding to build on whatever satire or skepticism they're trying to build in.
I felt very similarly. I think that there is an empathy for the Tammy Faye character in the film, and it does what I think, frankly, like more movies I wish would do, which is it shows a complicated portrait of a flawed person. This isn't a movie about a person who is perfect and who, abides by the high totem of morality in any way. She's very flawed. Jim Bakker is very flawed. There's a kind of greed. There's a vanity. There's a sense of contradiction in a lot of what they do. They've given their life to God, but of course they are these people that are very driven by a desire for money and wealth and access to power. So that's a good general frame, I think, for an interesting film. The challenge is the tone of the film is really hard to wrap your head around. Sometimes it seems like it's trying to be funny. Sometimes it seems like it's trying to be mortally grave. Sometimes it seems like it's trying to be satirical, to your point. And so I feel like I could feel the tone slipping through my fingers as I was watching the movie, despite the fact that it has something that I like, which is people really going for it in their performances and being uber committed. I'm very vulnerable to an uber committed Jessica Chastain performance. That's one of my favorite subgenres of movie. So there were things about it that I really liked, but I agree. I didn't have much awareness, say, of the constellation of Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell Sr. and Jim Bakker and kind of how they all fit together in the universe. So some of that was kind of interesting to learn as it was going, but I was also like, how much should I even be trusting what I'm seeing here? And how much of it is kind of like invented representations of things that happened? And should that even affect how I view the film? It's a little bit hard to know whether or not this was successful because I don't know what the goal was.
I completely agree. One more positive thing I'd like to say about it is that I thought they did a very deliberate and entertaining job of recreating the PTL network. There's a lot of production design and attention to the aesthetics that are definitely a part of the Tammy Faye Bakker story. But I have like kind of weird, blurry, photographic, like still memories of flipping through the channel and kind of seeing some of these things. But it's a very rich visual text that they had a lot of fun with and really commit to recreating. But even there in the recreation, it's like, okay, are you trying to teach me about what happened? Are you doing an SNL skit? And that's always when you're recreating with like people with visual flair and moments with visual flair, you do kind of edge up to SNL from time to time. And then it always felt, both in the recreation of the televangelism and even the Tammy Faye performance, that it's in dialogue with a public understanding of someone that I didn't have. And so I kind of got lost in the contrast. Or maybe the contrast doesn't land. Maybe it is a little confused about whose side it's on, or maybe it's trying to show a nuanced or complicated portrait of someone that overcomplicates it. But I agree. What was I supposed to think of Tammy Faye Bakker at the end? That I don't know. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I will defend the biopic. I really like the biopic. And I like a biopic that complicates and kind of raises some questions about someone. But I didn't really feel like I got any answers to this.
Yeah, I relate to what you're saying. I don't want the message of a movie to be spoon-fed to me. I think it's okay to leave it up to some sense of interpretation. I think the challenge here, and maybe ultimately the lesson of the movie, is that this person lived a very messy and complicated life, but it's unclear if this is a woman who's experiencing delusions of grandeur, whether or not she was profoundly talented at something and actually should be celebrated for that in a way. It seems to have that aspect of it. It also indicates that she was just deeply shallow, if you can be deeply shallow, like as shallow as it gets as a human being, just really liked material things and had no sense of an interior life about why she liked those things. Not a lot of self-analysis going on for Tammy Faye, which, to each their own. If you want to live a lifestyle like that, you're free to do so. But it's like, is she the hero of this story? Is it an attempt to make us more deeply understand how she started out this way? Because I would say that the flashback element was probably the least successful part of the movie for me, where it was like, it showed her hard scrabble roots. And I was like, wow, this is just like Walk Hard. You know what I mean? Like, this is it's like, it almost seems absurd. And it doesn't really seem like Michael Showalter's strength as a filmmaker. He's much better, I think, at like these kind of like grounded but absurd conversations between two characters. Like that's what really drove The Big Sick. That's what's really driven some of his more arch comedy over the years, and Wet Hot American Summer and The Baxter and movies like that, where you're like, this is a true dramedy. Like, dramedy is really what he does well. And this is kind of a dramedy, but it's also reaching for something a little bit beyond its grasp.
Yeah. A crucial thing for me, I did go back and watch the documentary on which this is based, just because I was curious. I was like,